She has received her PhD degree from the Center for Linguistics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and her BA Honours in English from Scottish Church College, University of Calcutta. She has published a number of papers in national and international journals and has presented a number of papers in many national and international conferences. Her area of interest are the typological studies of the languages in the Northeast India, as well as in the field of English language, learning, and teaching.
Welcome, ma'am. The session is yours.
Am I audible? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. Very good evening to one and all present here. And I would like to extend thanks to Pungu College, Pungu Arts and Science College, Tamil Nadu, and also to Ma'am Yasmin for inviting me and for allowing me to, be the resource person today. So let's begin. I feel, shall I begin?
Yes, ma'am. Kindly begin.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm sharing my screen. Please let me know if my screen is visible to you all. Is my screen visible?
No, ma'am, not yet. It is not visible.
Yet. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing. Can somebody resolve this? It's showing host has disabled attendee screen sharing. If the host can help me out in this.
Ma'am, your video is visible, ma'am, but not the screen.
Yes, I am not able to share the screen because somebody has disabled the screen sharing option. Whosoever is the host, kindly enable attendee screen sharing option from your side. Or or you can otherwise make me co-host. That would also be possible, I think, from your side.
Ma'am, kindly now try to share your screen, ma'am.
Yes, is my screen visible now? Is it visible now?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am,
ma'am.
it's visible now.
Okay, okay. Then let's begin. Okay. Once again, good evening, and the topic on which I will be delivering uh, my session today is very simple, very interesting, I should say, and uh, I'll just talk about some of the basic facts that we teachers in India, or rather in Indian subcontinent, come across with regards to our students when we go to the class, whether we teach English literature, whether we teach English language. Uh, we are stuck with some general issues, and uh, today I'll just talk about how, as teachers, some of these basic issues can be resolved then and there. Because if, as teachers, we are aware of these basic strategies as to how these issues can be handled in class, definitely we need not wait for English language teaching environment. So, the topic that I would be addressing today is teaching English language to the non native speakers, the challenges and the strategies. Well, I would like to begin the session on a very simple note. Today is 23rd of Feb. Day before yesterday, it was 21st of Feb, and I'm sure all of us know that it was the International Mother Language Day. Most of the universities, most of the institutions, we have celebrated, we have observed the importance, the significance of language, the significance, the importance of preserving, documenting what we say is our mother tongues. But why is it necessary to give so much of importance to language as such? So, what does language facilitate? We must say, since we belong to the field of linguistics, uh, people who belong to this field, we generally emphasize on preserving language. But why? What are the core reasons behind doing that? And why do we say that we need to give more importance to language today? Well, on a general note, what does language help us to do? Language facilitates communication. That is what we all know. Yes, it helps us to interact, it helps us to exchange messages, it helps us to share ideas in our community, in our society. That is why we say language helps us to express. Well, yes, that is true, that is a fact, but then that is one of the functions of language that we human beings are blessed with. Another very important function that we are enabled with, that we are facilitated with, but we unfortunately do not recognize, is the fact that language is one such medium that helps us to receive feedback. So when talking about feedback, what do we actually mean by feedback? We see, we have come across words like slip of tongues. We have come across statements where we see speakers responding, "Oh, I didn't mean to say this, I meant that." So what happens is, at times when we are so called absent minded, we tend to say words, sentences, phrases, uh, which we actually did not mean on the surface. So the workings of human mind creates problems. Now, as a matter of fact, when all these things happen, what comes to the forefront is another function of human language. And that function of human language enables both the speaker as well as the hearer. There are two roles. When we exchange messages, there are two parties. One is the speaker who speaks, and the other is the hearer, the listener, the audience. On part of both, on part of the speaker as well as on part of the listener, we can receive and give feedback. Feedback as to what errors we have just made, what errors we have just made while speaking, what errors we have just made while interpreting the messages that was delivered. So feedback is very important when, as speakers, we want to speak correctly. And this is what brings us to the fact that when teaching English language, many a times we find that our learners, our students, they understand, but when expressing their thoughts, when expressing the way we want them to express, they create mistakes. At times we find that yes, mistakes are there in their expressions owing to the reason that they have not understood the grammatical facts in English language. But also at times you see, we come across the fact and realizations that students, learners, they have understood, but when they start applying those English grammatical rules in their own way of expression, they come out with some errors. What we say are grammatical errors, and these grammatical errors enter into their spoken versions, enter into their expressions, owing to multiple reasons. But yes, the fact remains the fact that they themselves, if can rectify and give themselves feedback and check their errors, that is how they can realize their mistakes in a much better way on a bigger platform. Versus when the listener, who can be a friend, who can be, any associate or maybe the teacher, versus when that particular listener provides the speaker the feedback, then the learning process is a little slow, and there lies the difference between how well, how efficiently a speaker can master over English language. So the rate of acquisition, the rate of learning English language is determined to a greater extent if feedback is to be taken into account. Beside that, we also have another very important function that language helps us with is cognition, thinking. By the word cognition, we simply mean that it helps us to think, and all of us would agree to the fact that yes, language helps us to think. It is with the help of language that our thoughts are processed. We plan out about the future, we reflect about our past, we talk to ourselves. And this is also one of the very crucial aspects when we teach English language to students, to learners, we should force them. We should create an atmosphere, create a learning environment where learners of English language are bound, are forced, are compelled to think in the language, in the targeted language. Hence, as teachers in classroom, when we have a slow learner, we have a person, a student who is not so well versed in English language, well, we can promote his or her learning then and there in the classroom environment, amidst the lessons, the syllabus that we are teaching. If, as teachers, we concentrate on these three important, rather very important, I must say, the rather three core functions that language enables us with. First, communication. We encourage the students to communicate. The more they communicate, the better definitely is their proficiency levels. Feedback. If they can rectify and realize their own mistakes, the better is the acquisition, the better is the learning process. And thinking. So I would request the learners as well as the teachers to concentrate and help enable our students to express, use language, English language, as much as possible with regards to the three functions of human language. Now, if you look at the title of my session today, I have used the word non-native speakers. Now, in the English context, when we talk about native speakers, who are the native speakers and what do we actually mean by the two terms, native speakers, non-native speakers? To define them, these are some of the characteristic features against which the two groups of people can be identified. So native speakers are those speakers who by birth speaks the particular language. So a person who can speak English proficiently by birth uh, can be the native speaker of English language. And if or she, he or she, by birth speaks the English language, then probably he or she had acquired, I'm using the word acquired the language from his environment, from his society, from his community, from his family since birth. That means English was spoken in his environment since birth, and that is why the child's memory, the child's brain could process English language and pick it up right from his immediate environment since his birth. If that is the case, the proficiency level in that particular language increases and the child becomes a native speaker of English language. And hence, if the child picks up English language and he can is well versed, he has the level of cognition, the required level of cognition in that particular language, he is basically the native speaker. Then we say that English is his primary language, or what we say as L1, the first language. And if that is the case, then the fourth statement is applicable. The fourth criteria is applicable. And what is the fourth criteria? The child or the person can give grammatical judgments in that particular language. With regards to our present scenario, since we're talking about English language, yes. So a native speaker is one who has a very good level of proficiency in English language, as such that English becomes his first language. And the test that we basically give to decide whether or not English is his primary language is to see how well a person can give grammatical judgments. Well, I'm not going into the technical details of what do we mean by grammatical judgments, because we'll enter into a different scenario altogether. But yeah, only those speakers who can claim to be native speakers by birth should be given due respect, and all others who do not have that acquired level of proficiency in English language will not be able to give grammatical judgments. Even we, uh, most of us present in this meeting today, in this session today, we might have learned English, we might have picked up or acquired English not by birth, not from zero, day one of our birth. We have acquired English, we have picked up English only when we were basically into our schools or into the kindergartens, when we were at home with our family, we were probably speaking not English. So the proficiency level is decided depending on how much of language input is given to the native speakers, to the speakers basically from the environment. And based on that, we can categorize and say whether or not he or she is a native speaker. Versus non-native speakers. Who are the non-native speakers? Speakers who learns the language at a later stage, and hence they use English not for the purpose of general communication or interaction of messages. uh, they will also not use English for uh, receiving feedback. They will just be using English language for maybe at workplace. So only for very specific purposes we see these category using English as their language. Now, uh, when we say that we have to teach English language, we cannot apply the same strategies, the same methods, the same tools when dealing with these two categories. People who claim that they are the native speakers, or people who have started acquiring some English language input, say from the age of 2, from the age of 3, their level of proficiency, their level of how English grammar works in their mind would be different, versus those speakers, those learners who fall into the category of being non-native speakers. Because when a non-native speakers comes to the forefront, and when we have to deal with such speakers, their language proficiency in their own language is already established, and they have a good grip over the language that they speak. Now, for them to teach, for us to teach this group of speakers English language at a later stage in their life is really challenging, because often we see there are too many factors that become a hindrance when we actually deal with the non-native group of speakers. So, as teachers, when we deal with students, or you can say when we deal with the learners, we need to figure out and study the targeted group, whether or not the targeted group is the native speakers or the non-native speakers. What I'm trying to focus on in this session today is how and what are the challenges that as teachers we face when we have as our learners the non-native speakers of English language. Now, this is another concept that I was just talking about, the mother tongue. Well, mother tongue is always not the language that we are proficient in. As I said day before yesterday, we had been celebrating, observing worldwide the International Mother Language Day. The concept of mother tongue is not related or the same with the concept of a native speaker, with the concept of using L1. That's the first language. Mother tongue is the concept that is intertwined based on uh, birth. So, if a child is born to a Punjabi family, for example, then the mother tongue, the mother language of that child will be Punjabi. And no matter whether the child uses Punjabi at home or not, no matter whether the child can actually speak Punjabi, but yes, it's the family, it's the family name, it's the community to which the child is born, is what enables the child to get a language associated with his name. So that is the ancestral identity, that is the family identity that the child gets, which is not always the same when we talk about the concept of being a native speaker or having one language as somebody's primary language. So the two concepts, mother tongue and primary language, they are to be differentiated and understood. So that is one of the issues where that teachers sometimes come across, because many of the forms that students fill up, even we fill up these days, it shows mother tongue. Now, what is a mother tongue? That concept has to be understood well before we instruct students whether or not he or she is proficient in his mother tongue. Now, coming back to English, uh, when we are given the task of teaching English language, the first question that emerges out in the Indian scenario is, which variety of English language are we teachers going to teach in India? Well, uh, those of us who work in this field of language, we would be aware of the fact that though English is said to be an international language, it's a global language, and all across the world people use English. English that is used in British scenario, or in Great Britain, or you can say in the in and around UK, uh, that English is significantly different from the English that is spoken in America. Not just America, I would say, if we compare English that is spoken in USA with the English that is spoken in Canada, we see that Canadian variety of English is also completely different from the way it is spoken in US. Similarly, down south, we have a different variety of English that is being used, which is very famous today, and we see Australian English. We teach our students Australian literature, we teach our students American literature, but when teaching language, we also need to focus and figure out what is the language, what kind of English language are we going to teach our students as teachers or as learners in India, in the Indian scenario. Because when we look at the global world, there is not just one English that is spoken today, but there are multiple types, what we say are varieties of English available. So, as teachers in India, when teaching English language, what is the English language we need to focus on? Which variety, which kind of English language we need to talk about? Now, to be uh, very specific, when we say what is the difference, British versus American, these are the two broad uh, categories that we come across in our day-to-day life as well. Whether we type on computers, we see there are discrepancies with regards to spellings. Well, the differences are visible, and many of us are aware of the differences. I need not go into the details of these differences, but yeah, English spellings and the spellings that the American English uses are different. So, as teachers, when we are to instruct students, we need to be very, very specific as to uh, what is the language we are targeting, what is the variety of English we are going to teach to the students, and not just we decide upon the variety that we are going to teach to the students, but we also need to reason out which variety are we going to teach to the students. Because definitely if we teach them the British variety, the question emerges out that today most of these gadgets, or maybe very simply when we type things on our computers, the spellings that we come across are not the British variety. Most of the spellings that the computer takes automatically, otherwise there is a red mark underneath, is because computers are set to read American variety. So are we to teach them the American variety, or are we to teach them the British variety? So with regards to spellings, we need to be careful. Similarly, the next level that we need to think about is the word stock. There are thousands and lakhs and millions of words that are available. Now, which variety are we going to concentrate on, and why? Should we teach them the British vocabulary, or should we concentrate on teaching the American style, American way, the American manner of playing with the words? What are we as teachers using today in our day-to-day communication in the classroom environment, in uh, an environment where we are teachers and we are concentrating on teaching English as a language to the non-native speakers? Because these non-native speakers, uh, or to some extent the learners who have been speaking English since their kindergarten, since their class 1, most of the students, they are not aware of the differences as to why the differences are with regards to spellings, what are the differences with regards to pronunciations, and definitely not with the vocabulary. Because many a times, owing to fashion, owing to being modern or to project oneself to be modern, people stick to use the American style, the American words, without understanding, without knowing, without realizing that this is the American variety, this is the British variety. So, as teachers, unless and until we are aware of the differences, we cannot draw a line in our teaching environment. Otherwise, students will never be able to figure out the differences unless and until we instruct them uh, about the differences. Now, most importantly, when we come to what to speaking, there are huge problems when we instruct students and say, well, this is the grammatical rule that you need to abide by when you are to construct one such sentence in English language. For example, the British variety would say, I have just had lunch. The Americans are free in their style of living, which is very much evident in the way they speak. They would just say, I just had lunch, or I have just had lunch, which is an extra emphasis that the lunch has just been completed. So, our grammar books, when we talk about grammar books that we use to teach English language, which variety the grammar books concentrate on? In India, in the Indian scenario, will the grammar book accept the American I just had lunch, or I have had just had lunch? Or will the grammar book uh, uh, accept a sentence which goes like, you have to compulsorily use perfective have if you're talking about something which has just been completed? That is, I have just had lunch. So, uh, why not? As facilitators, as teachers, first decide amongst ourselves and figure out which is the variety that we as teachers in India are going to concentrate on. So we have in India, I would say, these three options. If you look at the probable language options that are found in the Indian scenario, we have British English that is used. We also have American English that is picked up by these so-called Z generation speakers more than we do, I think, in our conversation, in our communication, in our vocabulary. And side by side, we also know that there is a very relevant, significant Indian variety of English that is emerging out. Then the question that we need to ask ourselves is, which variety of English should we concentrate on when we create the syllabus? Which variety of English should we focus on teaching to the non-native speakers in the Indian scenario? Should it be the British? Should it be the American variety, which is more popular today in this generation? Or should we promote Indian English? Fortunately, unfortunately, the fact remains that in India, though as speakers, when we speak English language, we have no bar. We do not differentiate whether we are speaking in the American way or we are speaking in the British way. And I'm sure most of us will agree, because when we as teachers we converse, we interact with our students also, we use both the varieties. But in the formal domain, uh, the type of English that is used is basically the British variety, even today. So the grammar books that we follow in the schools, the grammar books that we follow in the colleges, in the English
I lost
language
it. I can come in.
teaching environment, the grammar books mainly are based on the English language grammar that has come down to India from the British English. So, once again, to focus on English language teaching in the Indian scenario, we need to first figure out the differences between Indian English, American English, British English, and then come to a consensus and design the syllabus accordingly, keeping in need, keeping in mind the needs of the learners today. Moving ahead from there, some of the general things that we see when we attempt to teach English language is that the language teaching sessions will show sometimes direct and often indirect influences of the primary language. That is what I just said, the L1. Whatsoever is the L1, the first language that the speaker is using, that L1 plays a very, very significant role in affecting learning, or for that matter say acquisition of English uh, with respect to the non-native speakers. Now primarily, what are the very basic influences that we see? I'm not going into the details because there are too many factors. These are some of the basic influences that we come across as teachers when we talk to them in our classroom environment. Accent becomes one of the major factors that, you know uh, whatsoever howsoever modern we are, whichever language is ingrained in our brains, in our memories since our birth, the accent interferes. the accent comes into the picture and influences the way we speak English language. Even howsoever good we are as speakers, as teachers, still in our language also, in our mode of communication also, we find the accent of our primary language has a major role to play. So when teaching English language, how are we to you know help the learners get rid of the problem and just concentrate on how English is spoken, how what accent is used by the native speakers of English when speaking English language. How much how much can we minimize the influence of RL1 when teaching or learning English as non-native speakers of English. The second thing that I'm sure you will also notice as teachers is the vocabulary, the word stock from RL1 that heavily enters into English language. So once again, the question arises as to how we are going to minimize the use of RL1 when teaching, or for that matter enabling the learners to learn English language. Because if we promote, or supposing if we take it for granted that okay, this is very common, then the zeal, the motivation of the learners to acquire the word stock in English language will be affected. And if the motivation is affected, if the learners find it easy to use a word from their own vocabulary and replace it, substitute as a substitute from the English vocabulary, learners will never be motivated enough to learn the word stock. Which is also a case when we talk to our students in this pocket of the country. We also find our students deliberately using words from their own languages in order to fill up the gaps that they have or they face when expressing. So we need to, as teachers, put a margin and put a boundary as to whether or not we should welcome or allow, or what percentage should we allow in our classroom environment. Because it's not always like teaching English language has to take place in a environment following a particular method, but as teachers of English literature, as teachers of English language in our classrooms also, we can do the needful. uh, Similarly, sentence formation rules, I just illustrated some of the basic differences with regards to the British rules, the rules that the Americans use. Sentence formation rules are also terribly affected when we talk about the L1 influence of English. Very simple is when it's from the common experiences that we come across, we have subject auxiliary inversion. If we talk about the proper rule, then when making a question, the auxiliary has to be fronted and then the subject comes in the picture. So it becomes like, will you go home? That's what a proper grammar rule says. But how many of our students actually speak in this way in their day-to-day conversation? And when we as teachers come across one such sentence where the student uses an intonation and you know uh, makes a question like, you will come with me, this is a direct, I would say, translation of क्या तुम घर आओगे, क्या तुम मेरे साथ जाओगे. So the subject auxiliary inversion rule is not retained in the day to day communication. Then The question that arises is, how many of us as teachers in our general environment, in our day-to-day environment, uh, take a note of such errors, such mistakes, if we say they are mistakes, and help our learners, help our students, rather correct our students and say, well, this is not the way we should. And if we don't, the question is, if we don't, then as speakers, why don't we raise issues and question those speakers, those students of ours, and ask them to correct? There could be reasons, there could be multiple reasons. One of the basic reasons is because we ourselves are undecided. Many a times we ourselves speak in the way and we don't follow the exact rules that are given in the grammar books. Probably we, as I said, in the formal domain, we retain the ethics, we retain the rules that are given in the grammar books, and we use as formal language as possible when we are writing down something, or maybe in the formal domain. But in the informal mode of communication, we probably do not obstruct or become or interfere into such mistakes, probably because behind our mind we also think and value Indian English that is emerging out. This is a debatable topic, but then yeah, this is what is happening on a general level. And if uh, our generation does not take heed, does not care about such mistakes, then we as teachers of English language, when we would like to instruct our students, uh, definitely these gaps, these problems will hinder their acquisition or their learning of English as a non-native speaker in the Indian scenario. So uh, this is very commonly found, and I'm sure this will be resolved only when, as teachers, we come to a common platform and we figure out what is the exact kind of language that we are going to use and teach to the non-native speakers of English language, considering there are three choices that we have: the British variety, the American variety, or for that matter, the Indian variety. Now, um, factors influencing the learning process. When we have students and we, create a learning environment, say we are having a targeted group of learners, it's found that the targeted group of learners, they, some of them might pick up the language at an excellent rate, at an excellent pace, whereas some others in the same targeted group might fail to do so. And people who work in this particular direction, they have figured out a lot many factors. The basic ones are what I would like to focus on: the motivation, the interest, the attitude of the learner becomes very important when we say whether he or she has learned or how much of proficiency has been acquired by the learner. The more the learner is motivated, the more the learner is interested, definitely the better will be his or her level of proficiency, the better will be the speed of learning. Second, the environment in which the learner is taught the language. Well, what is the environment? The environment can be multiple. For example, it can be, say, 1 hour session where the learner is exposed to learning the rules. It could be, say, 2 hours session or maybe 4 hours session per day, where the learner is not only exposed to learning the rules, but he's also exposed to experiments. He is given the chance to speak, interact, receive feedback, and realize his mistakes. So, what kind of learning environment we give to the students, we give to these non-native speakers, depending on the kind of environment, the learning process gets its pace. Personality factors, definitely. What is the attitude of the learner? Whether the learner is forced to learn the language, or whether the learner is personally interested in learning the language. That is also highly important, because when we conduct tests, proficiency tests, we see that so-called students who are said to be good, students who are really promising, they look like promising students, they are unable to come up to our expectations. So probably the attitude, the age, the mindset of the learners, these are very important factors when we consider whether or not the learner has achieved the targeted level of expectations. In relation to this, what becomes very important is what is the age at which the learner has begun to learn the language. And this is again one of the universal facts that uh, if the learner or the student for that matter is given the language environment within the critical period. Now, what is the critical period? This is said to be the age between zero, that is since birth, from birth till the age of puberty, that is till the age of say 13 or 14 years. If within this duration language environment is provided to the students or to the learners, then the acquisition is possible. Acquisition means the automatic learning of that language is possible. But if the language environment is given to a learner post the critical age, that is after the age of puberty, then it becomes rather challenging for the learner to pick up the language automatically. So acquisition is not facilitated to a greater extent. It is minimized, I would say, post the critical period, post the critical age. So even there, when we decide as to with regards to the syllabus, we decide what is the process that we need to stick to when teaching English language. We also need to know and figure out what is the age of the learner. Whether the learner is within the critical age, then the syllabus and the curriculum that we design should be accordingly. And if the learner has passed the critical age, then acquisition of whatever language it might be, it's minimum. So the syllabus and the curriculum has to be decided keeping in mind the critical age as well. And definitely, uh, as I said, what are the methods, what are the tools that we use when teaching English language? And these are some of the factors that helps us to decide and help the learners speed up the process of learning. uh, Ma'am, do I have time?
Yes, ma'am, you have time.
How much time do I have, ma'am?
From 15 more minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, teaching English becomes all the more challenging because we when we talk about Indian languages, most of the Indian languages are significantly different from the way English processes or English language works. Why? Because English is what we call, it is a stress timed language. Now, what is the stress time language? English has a rhythm. When the native speakers speak English, they apply what we say stress or accent at regular intervals in their spoken variety. So, we in India, when we speak our languages, most of our languages are not stress time. So, for our speaker of a language belonging to the non-stress timed pattern to pick up a language which is of the exact opposite or of a different category, where speakers are forcing upon certain syllables every time, so that the rhythm is maintained throughout the conversation, it becomes a real challenge for most of the non-native speakers to pick up English and speak in the way that is expected. So the rhythm or the stress effect, if you talk about the accent, if you talk about the pattern of how a Britisher speaks, well, that is also to be taken into account as to whether that is the way English should be spoken, or do we need to promote the Indian variety also, where I feel stress is not that important. But yes, if we talk about British variety, if we talk about the American variety, definitely the stress pattern has to be brought into the picture when we teach our students English. Very simple. Uh, you know some There are quite a number of rules, quite a number of patterns that is followed when we talk about English language. I'm not going into the details of it since we don't have time. uh, so the stress patterns, whether they are applicable at the level of words, the stress patterns, whether they're applicable at the level of sentences, all these things need to be taken into account. And when syllabus is to be designed, when curriculum is to be framed, once again we need to focus whether or not we need the British accent, whether we need to promote the Indian way of handling English language. Similarly, the way we speak English is where we, many a times in our conversation, in our day-to-day communication, we don't go by the rules. I just mentioned the subject auxiliary inversion rules, which is not taken care of when we are in a conversational mode. Many a times we don't do that. Similarly, uh, as far as English is concerned, uh, the uh, intonation is the way we modulate a voice, and the same sentence can be meant differently, can be, all the meaning of the same sentence can be altered based on where a voice is, modulated. Where do we, rise our pitch, where is the pitch lowered, what is the kind of intonation. So depending on multiple factors, we speak English. But yes, once again, the question lies, what are the things that we need to concentrate on when we instruct the learners as to what is the proper way of speaking English language? What is the proper way of using English language? Uh, well, this is what we generally do. Uh, there are two different ways that people handle language or use language today in the Indian scenario. We have a formal way of using language, which is basically nothing but the British way, where that is followed in our grammar books as well. But yeah, we also in our day-to-day communication take the liberty of using the informal way of speaking. Well, I call it informal because there are people, there are scholars who say it's the informal register, they say it's the informal way of speaking English language. But the informal way is actually informal if we say the British variety. If we follow the British norms, if we follow the norms that are still laid in our traditional grammar books, we say this is the informal way of speaking, this is the informal register. But what about the Indian variety? The Indian variety is actually very informal, or when we say Indian literature is being promoted, when we teach Indian English literature, don't we feel the need of promoting the Indian variety of English as well? If so, then is the Indian variety still to be considered informal, or should we make attempts to make this informal variety formal in our own way? That is once again what we need to address, think, discuss, and decide upon before we decide as to what should be the way we need to teach English uh, to the speakers who are basically the non-native speakers. Uh, well, there are several methods of teaching. We have the immersion method, we have audiolingual method, we have communicative English, communicative language teaching method, direct method, grammar translation method. Once again, it's up to the targeted language, as well as the targeted group of learners whom we are going to address. So there are multiple factors, there are multiple issues based on which we as teachers need to decide who is the targeted group of audience that we are going to handle. What is the need for that targeted group to learn or use language? Are they going to use language for a specific purpose, or are they going to use English language for communication? So what should be their need? So depending on various background surveys, we need to decide upon uh, what is the appropriate method, or many a times there are combination of methods, 2 or 3 methods can be put in together and experimented whether or not they are effective. So uh, immersion method, what is the immersion method? Immersion method is where the group of students are completely immersed in that targeted language environment, and they are forced, they are bound to use the targeted language uh, during the session. So how does it help is, well, since there is a pressure, definitely the students feel the need to communicate only in the English language, only in the targeted language. So they come out with errors, but yes, those errors, if are rectified by the speakers themselves, then that boosts the proficiency level, that speeds up and becomes more effective during that particular process. We also have audiolingual method, where different inputs are given in various modes, so that the learners can listen and also write down what they listen. They also have reading sessions, they also have sessions where they can listen to something, some input, and they can also repeat. But yes, these are the traditional methods that have been followed in the past. Some of them have turned out to be quite effective in certain cases, some of them have been refined, some of them have been given a completely new shape. So depending on the results that we get at a particular time, uh, methods are altered, modified, changed from time to time. uh, Keeping in mind the need for Indian students to learn English, I would say most of our Indian students learn English not for their, you know, personal use, but we learn English, we use English only when we need to communicate in a formal domain. So, one of the effective methods where results have been, very good is the communicative language teaching, that basically focuses not on teaching grammar rules, but on how communication skills in English language can be mastered. And the goal of language teaching, according to this particular method, is to help the speakers, to help the non native users of English to pick up competency, that is what we say is the ability to communicate in English language. So they don't basically focus on accent, they don't basically focus on what is the proper way of speaking, what is the rule of that we should use in speaking English language, but yes, they somehow manage to help the learners acquire the ability to converse in English language. So this is one of the effective methods which within a short duration has helped many of the targeted speakers to acquire proficiency in English language. Thank you so much. I think I have taken more than the time that was allotted to me. Um, um, Sorry for the delay, but then thank you so much.
Thank you for the wonderful session, ma'am. It was a thought-provoking session. Surely it will be helpful for the faculty members. Now the session is open for questions. Participants can ask their queries.
Yeah, do we have a question? I don't think so. Is there a question? Is there a question from the audience, ma'am?
Thank you, ma'am. It's a great pleasure to be a part of today's session. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank our resource person, Dr. Maumita De, for sparing her valuable time and giving a wonderful session. I would also like to thank the participants from various higher education institutions.
No, I'm wearing
The
this here.
feedback link for the Zoom meeting has been posted in the chat box, and for YouTube, it is posted in the comment section. Now, the session is over, and participants can leave the session after filling the feedback form. Thank you.
Dear ma'am, the session is over. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. We may leave the meeting, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
What card is in front of us? Here, card.